time you board a plane, they give you the same instructions. Before you help anyone else, your child, your colleague, stranger next to you, put your own oxygen mask first. And it's not selfish, it's just survival logic. And yet, in today's episode, we're going to talk about, and if this is resonating with you, as if with a lot of people who are managing middle managers, what we're talking about really is leadership without oxygen and how it's suffocating culture. And welcome to the show. We are the Your Choice Coach team. I'm Simone Sloan.
And I'm Rich Batchelor.
Absolutely. But what happens is that there's a squeeze that takes place within middle management, and I think it's really important to call out. And it's a space between strategy and execution, boardroom and team, right? And so really what we're trying to talk about here is that release. So why don't we just get to it?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. So, Rich, we've been talking about toxic cultures for quite some time, but I'm also curious in terms of why does it persist? And some people might roll their eyes because maybe they're living in it and they're just like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I'm saying that with love. But realistically, though, we've talked about servant leadership, we've talked about psychological safety, well-being programs, culture decks, away days. We can go on and on. What's going on?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Where do I start with all of this conversation? Because I think, like you say, we've been talking about this. Well, we've been talking about this for too long. That's the ultimate piece about this. This should not be still so prevalent. But I think, I love, as you were kind of introducing this, and we've talked about this separately before this conversation, this whole idea of what's fuel in the culture and what happens when that fuel is bad fuel. What happens when that fuel is not the right sort of stuff to actually help fuel that culture? And I think this is where we're seeing so many situations where the pressure, the squeeze, the expectation going on is not really allowing people to prepare themselves to give themselves of their best, whether it's the servant leadership or just generally a supportive leadership piece, because they have to react, they have to respond. So what's filtering down, the trickle down effect, is actually not quite the best that people can be doing. It's just all they can do at that moment in
Yeah.
time, under the pressure, in the squeeze. And then that it is given an example of how not to behave that becomes the norm, the expectation. And, you know, unfortunately, that's what affects the culture to become not such a nice culture to be living in and much more closer to that toxic or even it's even toxic. I sometimes wonder if that's like too much of a broad explanation. It's just a culture that's being prevented from thriving.
Yeah.
That's what it's come down
Yeah.
to.
And I think what happens, and it kind of leads up to a conversation we had previously before we jumped on, right? The symptoms, dressing
Yeah.
the symptoms. Oh, we need something now, and let's do this, right? As opposed to really stepping back and looking at what are some of the root causes. And maybe looking at those root causes, as you kind of alluded to, is the actual structure itself, right? And if we are just looking at symptoms, yeah, they'll come back because like a cold, right? You get well,
Yeah.
everything's
Yeah.
good again, and you get sick again. But I think too is that the actual symptoms don't really address the how we actually got here. And that's taking a deeper look and having to do much more harder work, right? For the organization, for the people within it, and actually to own up and fess up like, oh,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I think, to use your analogy a little bit further, it's a bit like you might recognize the symptoms and do the diagnosis, but what sort of experience has that person been through to get exposed to that situation, the what's given them infection, the virus, the whatever it may be. And I think this is where the journey, the experience of the individual is the piece that too many people are glossing over.
Mm,
They're talking about, okay, we're in a toxic, bad, dysfunctional culture, whatever it may be. Let's fix that rather than let's prevent it from happening in the first place.
like,
And that's the challenge piece
yeah.
because I think, this is where we talk about, the expectation of leadership and, you know, psychological safety in the workplace. And, there's some great stuff about sociopsychomatic stuff and things going on at the moment that are enabling people to give of their best selves.
Mm,
When people are able to give of their best selves, then it filters out to the
absolutely.
whole culture.
And I think
Yeah,
there is a gap, right? Because, and in a gap that happens, whether from output to strategy or execution, behaviors get rewarded in that space, whether it's being
yeah,
micromanaging, whether you're being, command and control, whether you're being overbearing in some degree of fashion. And I think that is it because we're bad humans or more of potentially the scarcity or fear, right? That is not that there's something missing and I'm not sure what it is and I don't have control over it. So this is how I have to present myself in order to be effective.
yeah. Yeah, I think, let's sort of look at this practically, for people. People take a job. Their job is taken so that they can pay the bills and do all the nice things they want to do and hopefully have a life outside of that work. But what happens then is they make a relationship with that job that becomes codependent. So they become dependent upon that
Mhm.
workplace and they become dependent upon the paycheck, whether it's monthly, two weekly, whatever it may be, that's coming in to folks. So then when that workplace becomes uncomfortable, dysfunctional, not meeting requirements, people are less likely to push back or challenge that because of the fear of it being what's the phrase now? Job impacting is the phrase that comes up all the time. Don't talk about that, or it might become a job impacting conversation. So people suck it up. They put their heads down. And this sort of suffering in silence
Mm,
continues,
yeah,
but it's not really a suffering in silence because it's a suffering in actually, you know, everybody else suffering around you. So it
right,
becomes this collective suffering for this
right,
situation. And
right.
and I think, this is a challenge. So, it's a challenge, and I could go off on 2 hours of
Absolutely.
tangent on this.
But I guess too, how do we create safe, productive cultures? What is it that leaders need to do? Because if you're talking about a structural system that's been reinforced, right? How do we kind of shatter that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. And it's not an easy thing. And, I always comment about the fact that, you can't change a culture overnight. You can't change the way people work. You can't change the behavioral stuff. But, behavioral change is possible. But you need to have some core elements to be able to do that. And to be honest with you, I think probably two key pieces for me are the transparency elements that are going on in the workplace, or lack of transparency.
Yeah,
It's the hidden agenda versus the transparent agenda, that type of piece.
absolutely.
But
But to the
also
other,
that leads into trust. Sorry, I was
yeah.
going to say the other piece is the trust piece that leads into. Sorry, you were going to say there.
No, 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 because I was just wanted to comment on that transparency because in some pockets, they think that radical oversharing is transparency. And when you and when
Yeah.
you're in the manager, you still have to filter things in terms of what you know, what you don't know, and what you're currently working on, right? And it's not just laying it all out there for your team to even get more worried and anxious or what have you. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think, to pick up on that piece with the transparency. Um, transparency isn't making everybody drink from the fire hose on everything that's happening. It's like it's about being able to manage what turns on, what turns off, and sharing information, being transparent about what's going on, also being mindful of the audience you're sharing with and how much and what's appropriate for them to know about at any point in time. And sometimes they really don't need to know whether that's giving you an ulcer or all the rest of the oversharing that might be going on in the workplace.
Absolutely. But I also want to bring out too, yeah, transparency is important because people want honest, open, right,
Yeah,
conversations. But trust also is very important too. And you're going to say, I want to kind of talk about that too, because I think that, as we know, is a driver for performance, for effectiveness, collaboration.
yeah, yeah. And I think trust is the piece that I, I think there's this element of there's a strong desire for trusted relationships in the workplace, but the actual follow through doesn't always meet the mark. And I think it comes down to a few different elements on this. Trust for a lot of people can be based on the competence capability of somebody to do a job. They trust you to do a job. But what we're talking about here is a trusted relationship with somebody in a position of authority, I guess, is the way you would look at it in that stuff, that you're trusting that person to have your back in the situation. And that's where I think the gaps come into play because examples may be demonstrated in the workplace where that's been totally thrown out for somebody's self-achievement goals, whatever it may be, that sort of stuff. So there's got to be a lot of work put into that trust piece. And I think, it's not impossible. And, ourselves, we've done trust-based workshops with organizations and all sorts of stuff over the years and everything on this. It's possible to build that trust,
Yep.
but there's got to be a willingness to build that trust in
Yeah.
the first place. And for me, that's the big first question. Do you actually want to build trust, or
Mm,
do you just want to say you're building trust?
absolutely. I think that's a really great question. And just for folks who are thinking about, trust, what is that, right? It's not something soft. We're not talking about some soft feel
No,
good thing. It becomes an economic variable within your business strategy. And when it's low, right, things slow down and it gets very costly and expensive, right, to get that information. Decisions get second guessed. And we've seen that
yeah,
in the work that we've done. People stop speaking up. So you're losing that innovative thoughts, right? And ways through which to get more efficient in your processes. Information gets filtered and maybe even weaponized in some instances that we've actually seen. And so, when the manager, people manager, operating in a low trust environment, it's essentially you're paying a tax, right?
yeah,
On every interaction. Just think about
yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah. And that's an interesting phrasing, paying a tax, because it's not necessarily a dollar's tax only, it's a reputational tax as well. Think about the appeal and attractiveness for hiring new employees, for actually gaining new clients, for actually selling to new places, whatever product you offer. If you don't have that trusted relationship where you can depend upon, rely upon people to do things without the need for any interfering micromanagement or whatever else is going on, because it's not necessary, it's just not needed, then what you're actually doing is you're expanding that trusted relationship piece to your clients, to your potential employees, and they see you and your reputation as somewhere they want to do business with, somewhere they want to engage with because of that trust.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And absolutely, because that's exactly what this is, right? And I thank you
Yeah,
for saying that. And part of that work too, just given the environment under which we're operating, we talked about the gap, right? And the gap
Yeah.
now becomes change rapidly, chaos maybe in certain instances. And so a muscle that managers, people need to start flexing is being confident in uncertainty. And I think that is the huge thing that drives the transparency, drives decision making, drives the way in which we trust yourself, but also with others and engage folks. That
Mhm.
becomes ever more important too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that sort of, strength to demonstrate how you navigate uncertainty is so common. I say so common. I'm trying to work out which end words put in there. So commonly needed, but yet so commonly absent as well. It's which word do I put at the end of that sentence? I was at an event last week, and one of the big conversations that kept on coming up was about the value of curiosity for
Mm,
helping this piece, and the fact that we need to stretch that curious muscle to help us navigate these disruptions. And what this loops back to is that too many organizations that are struggling or challenged to be successful don't encourage curiosity, they encourage compliance. They
mm,
encourage compliance with the status quo. And yet, the organizations that are thriving, developing, becoming more are the ones that know how to apply that curiosity to question if this way is the only way. Is there an alternative way? Is there a better way? Is there a different way? Is there a way that's got a lower tax on what those people's energy banks are
absolutely.
experiencing?
Absolutely. And what I hear from that too is that you're calling people into a conversation as opposed to shutting them down. And I think that's ever more important now because if you're not, I don't want to say the right questions, but I want to say open-ended, authentically curious conversations where you really want to hear different perspectives, you get that. And companies who
Yeah,
get that are the ones that are actually thriving and the people are thriving.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think we shouldn't ever underestimate the benefit of actually quality hosting in a way, because that's what you're doing, is you're hosting the conversation to come inwards. You're attracting that discussion to be part of the norms, to be part of the way you work around here. And that's what really helps the development, the evolution of
Absolutely.
organizations going forward.
Absolutely. And then too, what happens is I've heard managers say, oh, my team trusts me. When in one-on-one situation, we're great. But then they get into group dynamics and all of a sudden hands are folded, nothing's coming out of their mouths, and they're just kind of waiting for time to end the meeting, right? What is that all about? What is that? What's going on? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think
So
that's also
bizarre.
something to kind of watch, which kind of leads into our third part of this, which is around signals. What are some of the
Yeah.
signs to signal whether you're thriving or really just surviving? I think that's important to
Hmm.
think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's interesting what you were just mentioning with the manager meeting. Because for me, one of the biggest signals that you're not thriving is actually silence.
Mm,
It's that element of, so something gets said. Does anybody ask questions about it? Does anybody follow on conversation about it? Or does it just get accepted as being, hey, okay, that's what we're doing, end of. And
absolutely.
that's a demonstration to me of an environment that doesn't encourage thought, thinking, whatever you want to call it, in terms of the activity. It's just we're going to be told what to do. So now we've been told what to do and we are going to get on with it. No questions, no ifs, no buts.
And there's a compliance issue right there, right? Complacency and
Absolutely.
just being, we'll just listen, nod, and go, okay, this is great.
Yeah,
Knowing that they
yeah.
probably won't work in their worlds because of how the environment operates, but they'll just, okay, right? Another thing I think is a good signal, it's performing resiliency, where you
Hmm.
tell everybody everything's fine. You're pushing through, right? To show a form of strength, when it's really you're suppressing your true feelings and how things really are, and you're like you mentioned suffering in silence. This is it.
Yeah,
But putting an outward face that I've got this.
yeah, yeah. It almost makes me think of the sort of toxic optimism type element, isn't it? It's like if I keep on saying everything's great, it's going to be great. Well, actually, what are you actually covering by saying everything? We've got this, or we can cope, or even going to the other side as well of that piece. I would say it's similarly where there's an expectation that the better the leader, the more they can cope with, the more they can take on. Oh, you just need to stand up and get on with that 50 and 60 hour a week working. That is not a sign of good leadership.
No, no, it's actually a sign of chronic stress. And when you're working
Yeah,
in an environment where, is it's not giving back, but demanding so much more, burnout, and you just start either stop advocating for yourself and for your team, or you just like
yeah,
have no boundaries or saying overly yes to everything because everything's great and I'm good, or you're saying no because I'm tapped out and I just don't have anything to give.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting as well because I think you've got to be careful because you were saying about like the performative resilience type element as well. I think performative, a lot of things is where there are signals coming through on here because it's, performative inclusion. Oh, we've got a different person, so we're going to include them rather than actually having meaning and depth behind it. You've got situations where people are, performative performance marking, but there's still got to be the applied bell curve because we can't have too many people doing too well in here. And that's so all of these things are where the talk is talked, but the walk is a very different walk that goes behind it.
Absolutely. And the one key thing I would say is that the self-care piece is very important, right?
Yeah.
I think that there's a need to kind of check in with self and really understand what it is that you need as a human, right? And it may even tap into understanding what my values are and do they really align with what's happening within the organization? Because when you have that friction, we feel it in that gut and that it's Sunday afternoon. We kind of talked about that, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I excited or I'm dreading this physically, emotionally, and mentally? That's those were signals.
Yeah, it's like the end of the summer holidays, going back to school, and you
Yeah,
suddenly go, "Oh, I don't want to
I
go. Please don't make me go. Please don't make me go."
know. But yeah, so those I think those are things that we can to talk about. But to kind of wrap this up and put a bow on this conversation, I think we talked about the toxic cultures and we talked about looking at addressing the system, right, as opposed to just symptoms. And I think that's one of the key things that's important. I think you mentioned also the trust, the transparency, and the confidence that we talked about in uncertainty. But I think it's not radical, right? Not radical transparency that we're talking about. It's measured. It's really looking at it in terms of knowing filtering out what they need to know,
Mhm.
right, and what's important from that perspective. And I think that if you are in middle management right now, and watch for your signals, look at how you're feeling and call that out because if you're not naming it, you're suppressing it. And I
Yeah.
think that you can't pour from an empty cup because it won't serve you in the long term. So, anything else you'd like to add, Rich?
I think from me, so I think I'm going to add three things to the conversation. One is just an observation piece for people in terms of that self-care stuff and everything like that. Is don't be afraid to talk with somebody who's maybe outside the workplace who's trusted and ask them how they are seeing your well-being, your health and well-being, because you may not notice as well as somebody else will notice the effects of the culture and the impact and the situation is on you. I think the second piece I would say is don't be afraid to be not okay about something. And this is where we often build this thing of like, I have to be happy, happy, happy about everything I do and all the rest of it. That's back to that performative piece that you were mentioning as well. So I think pulling back from that as well. And then I think the third thing from that is to also just recognize that we can all only do so much. So know your own signals or ask other people, looking back to my first comments here, learn to be able to identify when too much is too much and step away if you need to. And I'm not saying like, jack in the job or anything like that. I'm not implying that because I understand dependencies and things like that. But sometimes you just need to take that calming moment and get away. And that's where that resiliency, that's more of a genuine resiliency, is important to people. The authentic resiliency piece coming in can actually help you cope with whatever life throws in your
Love
direction.
it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So if this resonated with you, or share it with another manager that you know, because the best part about this is having conversations that can start another one. And so we're going to see you with our next episode next month. And until then, I'll say lead well, breathe, and thank you.